Here's a ready to record, exactly one minute hook that uses only the words from your script and hits like a freight train from the first second. In the remote mountains of Appalachian, Tennessee, winter snows could trap entire settlements for months at a time. There lived a man the community trusted above all others, the blacksmith, the lay preacher, beloved Ezekiel Drummond, until investigators discovered what he had built beneath his own home. What they found scratched into those stone walls would make seasoned lawmen refuse to speak of it for decades. A woman 8 months pregnant, shackled at the wrists with iron restraints that had worn her skin raw. Her face, gaunt from starvation, collapsed into the sheriff's arms, whispering, "He said God told him to purify me." Her husband had kept her chained in a secret cellar for 8 weeks, delivering daily sermons while she starved. But she wasn't the first. 3 previous wives had all died in childbirth. Their graves proved they'd been starved and shackled exactly the same way. When Ezekiel fled into the mountains, his pregnant victim didn't wait for justice. She bought his house at auction and locked him in his own underground prison for the exact same length of time. The judge ruled it self-defense. This is the documented true story that left an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about justice, mercy, and revenge. In the remote mountains of Appalachian, Tennessee, where winter snows could trap entire settlements for months at a time, there lived a man the community trusted above all others. Cove Creek in 1883 was a place where neighbors depended on each other for survival, where a blacksmith's skills meant the difference between life and death, and where a lay preacher's words carried the weight of divine authority. The story I am about to tell began in these isolated hollows where secrets could be buried as deep as mountain roots, and where one man's twisted interpretation of Scripture would transform him into something monstrous. Ezekiel Drummond was respected, essential, beloved until investigators discovered what he had built beneath his own home. What they found scratched into those stone walls would make seasoned lawmen refuse to speak of it for decades. But this account doesn't end with just one victim suffering. What happened when that victim survived, escaped, and decided that divine justice wasn't moving fast enough? How does a pregnant woman turn the tables on her tormentor and deliver the most perfect revenge imaginable? The court records tell a story of retribution so precise, so calculated, that it left an entire mountain community questioning everything they thought they knew about justice, mercy, and the lengths a woman will go to balance the scales. Prepare yourself for what's coming next, because this tale of imprisonment and revenge will test everything you believe about human nature. Subscribe to stand with us as we uncover these buried truths and comment with your city and time. We love seeing where these documented accounts reach. The clock in Sheriff Josiah Blackwood's cabin struck half midnight on April 14, 1883, when desperate pounding shattered the mountain silence. What he found beyond his door would haunt him for the rest of his days. A woman 8 months pregnant, shackled at the wrists with iron restraints that had worn her skin raw. Her face gaunt from starvation, her eyes holding a terror that spoke of unspeakable horrors. Temperance Drummond collapsed into his arms, her first whispered words cutting through the April night air like a blade. He said God told him to purify me. Sheriff Blackwood, a former Union Army sergeant who had seen the worst of human cruelty during the war, immediately recognized the signs of prolonged imprisonment and systematic starvation. Her condition defied explanation. The iron shackles were custom forged, professionally crafted restraints that would have required considerable metalwork skill to create. The weight loss was so severe that her pregnancy appeared the only thing keeping her upright, and the psychological trauma in her eyes suggested weeks, perhaps months, of captivity. As he helped her inside and began documenting her injuries, one detail emerged that would transform a domestic dispute into the most horrifying criminal investigation in Tennessee. Mountain history. The perpetrator was her own husband, Ezekiel Drummond, the settlement's most trusted blacksmith and lay preacher, a man who had married her just 3 months earlier in what the entire community had celebrated as a blessed union. Temperance's fragmented account recorded in Blackwood's meticulous notes that survive in Tennessee State Archives revealed 8 weeks of imprisonment in a stone cellar beneath their home, while Drummond delivered daily sermons about cleansing her soul from the corruption of pregnancy. Each detail she provided contradicted everything the community believed about the respected man who shod their horses, repaired their farm tools, and delivered compelling Sunday sermons when the circuit preacher couldn't navigate winter trails. Sheriff Blackwood's initial skepticism evaporated as Temperance described the underground chamber with architectural precision that no one could fabricate. Stone walls reinforced with iron brackets, multiple locks on an oak door, and scratch marks she had carved into the walls, spelling desperate pleas for help. Her testimony, preserved in complete court transcripts, documented Drummond's systematic approach: daily visits where he quoted twisted scripture about women needing purification through suffering, carefully measured food rations designed to keep her alive but weakened, and religious justifications that revealed a calculated theology of imprisonment. The sheriff's military experience with interrogation told him this level of detail and consistency could only come from lived experience. The investigation that followed would expose a pattern of horror that had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. As Sheriff Blackwood began interviewing neighbors the next morning, disturbing details emerged about Drummond's 3 previous marriages, all of which had ended in the supposed tragic deaths of young wives during childbirth. Martha Hendress, who married Drummond in 1873, had been found dead in her cellar during winter, officially attributed to birthing complications despite neighbors reporting prolonged screaming that lasted for days. Ruth Coleman, his second wife, married in 1876, died under similarly suspicious circumstances 2 years later, with the local midwife noting Drummond's strange reluctance to summon help and his insistence on private purification periods before births. The pattern became undeniable when the investigation revealed the fate of Sarah Milan, Drummond's third wife, who had died in 1881 after what neighbors described as an unusually difficult winter confinement. During the search of Drummond's property, investigators discovered a partially burned diary hidden behind loose stones in his workshop containing fragments written in Sarah's hand, describing holy imprisonment and purification through suffering in language that matched exactly the theological justifications Temperance had reported. The diary entries, submitted as evidence and preserved in court records, documented weeks of captivity and starvation justified through Drummond's twisted interpretation of Scripture about cleansing expectant mothers. Sheriff Blackwood's methodical investigation revealed how Drummond had systematically selected his victims. All were either orphaned, recently widowed, or new to the settlement women without strong family connections who would not be immediately missed if they disappeared for extended periods. His position as the community's only blacksmith gave him both the metalworking skills to create restraints and the trusted access to homes where he learned about pregnancies and family situations. More disturbing still, his role as lay preacher provided religious authority that allowed him to justify increasingly strange requests and behaviors to both his victims and the broader community. The physical evidence discovered at the Drummond property defied any innocent explanation and confirmed Temperance's account in horrifying detail. The stone cellar beneath their home had been systematically modified into a prison chamber with iron brackets bolted into walls at precise heights for restraining a pregnant woman. Scratch marks carved deep into stone spelled out desperate messages, and where patterns on the floor documented months of pacing within the confines of heavy chains. Sheriff Blackwood's investigation notes, preserved in county archives, include detailed sketches of the cellar layout and measurements that would later prove crucial in establishing the premeditated nature of Drummond's crimes. The community's initial disbelief transformed into horror as the full scope of the evidence emerged during the first week of investigation. Granny Sarah Potitz, the settlement's midwife for 30 years, came forward with testimony that she had been deliberately excluded from attending the births of all 3 previous wives. Despite being the only trained birthing assistant in the region, her professional records, maintained with meticulous care, documented Drummond's unusual requests for extended duration, birthing supplies, extra restraints, and provisions for weeks-long confinements that contradicted every normal mountain birthing practice she knew. The investigation expanded when Sheriff Blackwood ordered the exhumation of Drummond's 3 previous wives, a decision that required overcoming significant community resistance and legal challenges. The examination of their remains was conducted by the county physician and documented in court records, revealed evidence of prolonged malnutrition and restraint injuries consistent with extended imprisonment rather than death from. Each body told the same story of systematic starvation and physical restraint that matched exactly the conditions Temperance had survived. As the evidence mounted, one question dominated the investigation. Where was Ezekiel Drummond? The man who had built an underground prison and systematically murdered 3 wives had vanished into the Appalachian wilderness, leaving behind only the horrors he had created, and a community struggling to comprehend how their most trusted member had hidden such monstrous evil. Sheriff Blackwood's pursuit would lead to a confrontation that would test every principle of justice and revenge in ways that no one could predict, setting the stage for a reckoning that would satisfy the deepest human need to see evil punished and victims vindicated. Sheriff Blackwood. This methodical examination of the Drummond property on April 15th began at dawn with a systematic search that would uncover evidence so disturbing that seasoned mountain lawmen would struggle to document it without physical revulsion. The entrance to the Cellar prison lay hidden beneath what appeared to be an ordinary root cellar door, but the reinforced oak planks bore the scars of desperate escape attempts, deep gouges where fingernails had clawed, and wood-metal brackets bent from internal pressure and stains that spoke of bodily functions performed in captivity. Each detail, photographed and sketched in Blackwood's investigation files, revealed the calculated engineering of human suffering. The stone steps leading into the underground chamber showed where patterns that defied innocent explanation, with smooth depressions worn into granite from the shuffling of chained feet over months of imprisonment. Sheriff Blackwood's measurements preserved in county court records documented a space 12 feet by 8 feet with a ceiling height of just 6 feet, deliberately designed to prevent a pregnant woman from standing fully upright during the final months of confinement. The walls themselves told the most damning story. Scratch marks carved deep into stone with fingernails and improvised tools spelled out messages that would become the prosecution's most powerful evidence. The words "Help me" appeared 17 times across the 4 walls, carved at different heights and depths, that documented the physical deterioration of multiple victims over several years of use. More chilling still were the initials MHRC and SM scratched near the floor in increasingly weak strokes, identifying Martha Hendress, Ruth Coleman, and Sarah Milan as previous occupants of this underground hell. Sheriff Blackwood's detailed sketches, submitted to the court and preserved in Tennessee State Archives, mapped every carving, every stain, every modification that transformed a simple storage cellar into a custom-designed prison for pregnant women. The physical restraints discovered bolted into the stone walls represented the most damning evidence of premeditation and systematic cruelty. Heavy iron shackles, professionally forged with Drummond's distinctive metalwork style, were anchored at precise points that allowed limited movement while preventing any possibility of escape or full rest. The chains showed were patterns that documented not just weeks but months of continuous use, with links worn
thin from constant friction and metal fatigue that spoke to the prolonged nature of multiple imprisonments. Each shackle bore scratches and dents from desperate escape attempts, creating an archaeological record of suffering that no defense attorney could explain away. The discovery of a wooden bucket in the corner, stained and positioned for bodily functions, revealed the deliberate humiliation built into Drummond's system of imprisonment. Beside it lay a tin cup and wooden spoon, the only implements provided for eating the carefully rationed meals that kept victims alive but systematically weakened. Sheriff Blackwood's inventory, documented in his official report, noted that both items showed teeth marks where starving women had attempted to consume even the wood in their desperation for sustenance. The positioning of these items, measured and mapped in the investigation files, created a picture of calculated dehumanization that went far beyond simple imprisonment. The most disturbing evidence emerged when investigators discovered Drummond's detailed written records hidden behind loose stones in the cellar walls. These documents, preserved in complete form in court files, revealed his twisted theological framework with entries dating back to 1873 documenting each imprisonment with clinical precision. His handwriting recorded meal schedules, purification progress, and religious justifications that revealed a mind that had systematically transformed Christian doctrine into a blueprint for torture. Each entry confirmed the calculated nature of his crimes, while providing exact dates and durations that corroborated the physical evidence carved into the walls. The basement chamber yielded additional evidence that expanded the scope of Drummond's crimes beyond simple imprisonment. A collection of baby clothes never worn suggested preparations for births that never occurred or infants who did not survive the conditions their mothers endured. More sinister were the medical implements, crude surgical tools, and lengths of rope that implied Drummond had performed his own birthing procedures in this underground chamber, explaining why no midwife was ever summoned and why no surviving children existed from his previous marriages. Sheriff Blackwood's photographs of these items, taken with the new forensic photography techniques he had learned during military service, provided irrefutable documentation of the full horror. Witness testimony gathered during the property investigation revealed how Drummond had used his trusted position to conceal his crimes in plain sight. Nehemiah Crawford, whose farm bordered the Drummond property, testified that he had often seen Drummond carrying unusually large amounts of food to his root cellar during times when his wives should have been bedridden with difficult pregnancies. Crawford's detailed statement, recorded in court transcripts, described how Drummond would make these trips at dawn and dusk, always alone, always carrying enough provisions for someone confined underground for extended periods. The investigation of Drummond's blacksmith workshop revealed the methodical preparation behind his crimes, with detailed sketches and measurements for the restraints found in the cellar prison. His forge showed evidence of recent work on iron shackles and reinforcement brackets, with metal filings and partially completed restraints that suggested he was preparing for future victims even as he held Temperance captive. Sheriff Blackwood's examination of the workshop tools, documented in his investigation notes, revealed specialized implements designed specifically for modifying the underground chamber and maintaining the restraint system. More damaging evidence emerged from the discovery of Drummond's correspondence with suppliers in Knoxville, ordering unusual quantities of chain iron stock and specialized hardware that served no legitimate blacksmithing purpose for a rural mountain settlement. These purchasing records, subpoenaed and submitted as evidence, created a paper trail documenting his systematic preparation for multiple imprisonments over a period spanning more than a decade. Each order correlated precisely with the estimated dates of his marriages, creating a timeline that revealed the premeditated nature of his crimes. The physical examination of the cellar revealed modifications that could only have been made over months or years of careful planning. Drainage channels carved into the stone floor directed waste away from the living area, while ventilation holes barely large enough to prevent suffocation provided just enough air to sustain life without allowing sound to escape to the surface. Sheriff Blackwood's architectural analysis, preserved in court records, demonstrated that these modifications required extensive knowledge of construction and engineering that transformed the space into a perfect prison, designed to keep victims alive while ensuring their complete isolation from the outside world. The discovery of multiple sets of women's clothing, all sized for pregnant women in various stages of confinement, provided the final piece of evidence establishing the systematic nature of Drummond's crimes. Each set was carefully folded and stored in wooden crates labeled with initials that matched his previous wives, creating a macabre museum of his victims that he had preserved as trophies. The condition of these garments, examined and catalogued by Sheriff Blackwood, revealed stains and damage consistent with prolonged wear during imprisonment. While their careful preservation demonstrated Drummond's psychological attachment to his crimes and victims, the exhumation orders signed by Judge Horatio McClure on April 20th sent shockwaves through Cove Creek Settlement as Sheriff Blackwood prepared to uncover evidence that would transform suspicion into undeniable proof of serial murder. The investigation had expanded beyond Temperance's imprisonment to encompass the suspicious deaths of Martha Hendress, Ruth Coleman, and Sarah Manthry, women whose graves would yield secrets that their killer believed were buried forever. Each coffin contained evidence that contradicted every official death record, revealing a decade-long pattern of systematic murder disguised as tragic birthing complications. Martha Hendress Drummond's first wife, who died in 1874, had been buried with the community. As sympathy as a victim of the harsh mountain birthing conditions that claimed so many young mothers, the county physician's examination of her remains, documented in court records preserved in Tennessee State Archives, revealed extensive evidence of prolonged malnutrition and restraint injuries that were impossible to explain. Through natural birthing complications, her wrists and ankles showed deep grooves in the bone where iron shackles had worn through skin and muscle during months of imprisonment, while her skeletal structure displayed the telltale signs of systematic starvation that matched exactly the conditions Temperance had survived. The examination revealed more disturbing evidence when the physician discovered that Martha S. pelvic bones showed no signs of
recent childbirth. Despite official records claiming she died from birthing complications, her remains contain no evidence of the physical trauma associated with difficult labor, but instead displayed the characteristic bone damage of prolonged confinement in cramped conditions. The physician's detailed autopsy report, submitted as evidence, documented fractures consistent with being chained in positions that prevented normal movement for extended periods, creating an irrefutable medical record that transformed Martha's death from tragedy to murder. Ruth Coleman's exhumation yielded even more damning evidence, including the discovery of iron filings embedded in her bone, structure that matched exactly the metal composition of the shackles found in Drummond's Cellar prison. The county physician's analysis, preserved in complete court transcripts, revealed that Ruth had survived her imprisonment for significantly longer than Martha, with bone scarring that indicated months of systematic abuse before her eventual death from starvation and exposure. Her skeletal remains told a story of gradual deterioration that contradicted every witness statement about her supposed quick decline during childbirth. The most horrifying discovery came when investigators found evidence that Ruth had given birth while chained in the underground chamber, with her infant's remains discovered wrapped in deteriorated cloth beneath her body. The tiny skeleton bore no signs of natural death or birthing complications, but instead showed evidence of deliberate suffocation shortly after birth, revealing that Drummond not only murdered his wives, but eliminated any children who might survive to testify about the conditions of their birth. This evidence, photographed and documented by Sheriff Blackwood, established that Drummond's crimes extended beyond spousal murder to include infanticide. Sarah Millant's remains provided the final piece of evidence that established Drummond's escalating pattern of cruelty and systematic refinement of his murder methods. The examination revealed that Sarah had survived the longest imprisonment of any victim, with bone damage indicating over 6 months of confinement in increasingly restrictive restraints that prevented normal movement or rest. Her skeleton showed evidence of multiple fractures that had healed incorrectly, suggesting that Drummond had deliberately broken bones to prevent escape attempts while keeping her alive for extended torture. The physician's report noted that her death appeared to result from a combination of starvation, infection, and systematic physical abuse that represented the culmination of years of perfecting his methods. The discovery of Sarah's partially burned diary during the property search provided written testimony from beyond the grave that corroborated every detail of the physical evidence. Her handwriting, authenticated by comparison with marriage records and confirmed by surviving family members, documented her imprisonment with dates and descriptions that matched exactly the evidence found in Drummond's cellar. The diary entries submitted as evidence and preserved in court files revealed that Sarah had recognized her fate and attempted to leave a record of Drummond's crimes for future investigators to discover. Her final entries described hearing the screams of previous victims and finding their carved messages in the stone walls. The investigation expanded when Sheriff Blackwood discovered additional evidence suggesting that Drummond's crimes may have extended beyond his 4 known marriages. Church records obtained from neighboring settlements revealed inquiries from Drummond about available widows and orphaned women in surrounding communities, creating a pattern of predatory behavior that targeted vulnerable women with no family connections to investigate their disappearances. His correspondence with other mountain preachers, preserved in Methodist church archives, showed him systematically gathering information about isolated women who might become his next victims. More disturbing evidence emerged from the testimony of Granny Sarah Pottitz, the community midwife, who revealed that Drummond had questioned her extensively about birthing procedures and the physical signs of pregnancy that he claimed were necessary for his lay preaching duties. Her detailed statement, recorded in court transcripts, described how Drummond had requested information about calculating pregnancy duration, identifying higher-risk pregnancies, and recognizing the signs of prolonged labor that now appeared to be research for selecting and imprisoning his victims. Her professional expertise provided crucial testimony about the deliberate medical knowledge Drummond had acquired to facilitate his crimes. The discovery of Drummond's theological writings hidden in his workshop revealed the twisted religious framework that justified his systematic murder of pregnant women. These documents, preserved in complete form in court evidence files, contain detailed interpretations of biblical passages about women, spiritual corruption during pregnancy, and the necessity of purification through suffering. His handwriting revealed a systematic theology that transformed Christian doctrine into justification for imprisonment, starvation, and murder, providing insight into the psychological framework that enabled his decade-long killing spree. The investigation revealed how Drummond had used his trusted position in the community to identify and isolate his victims. Through a systematic process that began months before each marriage, his workshop records, examined by Sheriff Blackwood, contained detailed notes about the financial situations, family connections, and social isolation of various women in the settlement, creating a predatory database that allowed him to select victims who would not be immediately missed when they disappeared for extended periods. Each potential victim was evaluated for her vulnerability and the likelihood that her disappearance would trigger community investigation. Sheriff Blackwood's examination of property records revealed that Drummond had strategically acquired his homestead specifically for its isolation and the geological features that made it ideal for concealing his crimes. The property's location, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor and accessible only by a single mountain trail, provided perfect isolation for conducting imprisonments without detection. More sinister still, geological surveys showed that Drummond had selected land with natural stone formations that made excavating the underground prison chambers significantly easier, while providing sound dampening that prevented screams from carrying to neighboring properties. The mounting evidence created an irrefutable case that Ezekiel Drummond had systematically murdered at least 4 women and their unborn children over a period of more than a decade, using his trusted position as blacksmith and lay preacher to identify vulnerable victims and his isolated property to conceal their prolonged torture and murder. Each piece of physical evidence corroborated witness testimony and written records to create a comprehensive picture of calculated evil that had masqueraded as religious devotion while claiming multiple innocent lives. Sheriff Blackwood's manhunt for Ezekiel Drummond culminated on April 28th when mountain trackers discovered him hiding in an abandoned mining cabin 12 miles northeast of his property. his capture marking the beginning of interrogations that would expose the full psychological horror behind his decade of systematic murder. Drummond's appearance shocked even seasoned lawmen. His hair had turned completely white in the 2 weeks since his escape. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and his eyes held the haunted expression of a man whose carefully constructed world of religious justification had collapsed under the weight of exposed evidence. His first words upon arrest, recorded in Sheriff Blackwood's official report, revealed the depth of his delusion. The Lord's work is never finished, and the vessels of corruption must be purified. The initial interrogation sessions, conducted in the county jail and documented in complete stenographic records preserved in Tennessee State Archives, revealed Drummond's systematic approach to selecting and imprisoning his victims with a clinical detachment that horrified investigators. His confession, extracted over 3 days of questioning and verified through comparison with physical evidence, detailed how he had developed his twisted theology through years of isolation and religious study that transformed biblical passages about women's spiritual purity into justification for imprisonment and murder. Each revelation demonstrated the calculated nature of his crimes, while revealing psychological mechanisms that had allowed him to maintain his respected community position while systematically killing pregnant women. Drummond's detailed account of his first murder, that of Martha Hendris in 1874, provided investigators with a horrifying blueprint that explained how he had refined his methods through subsequent victims. His confession, recorded verbatim in court transcripts, described how he had convinced Martha that her pregnancy required spiritual purification through isolation and prayer, gradually introducing restraints and reducing food rations while delivering daily sermons about cleansing her soul from worldly corruption. Systematic nature of her murder, lasting over 4 months, established the template he would follow with increasing refinement through his subsequent victims. The interrogation revealed how Drummond had used his position as lay preacher to develop theological justifications that satisfied his psychological need to view his crimes as divine service rather than murder. His written theological framework, discovered during the interrogation and submitted as evidence, contained detailed scriptural interpretations that transformed pregnancy from a natural blessing into a state of spiritual corruption requiring purification through suffering. These documents, preserved in court files, demonstrated the intellectual effort Drummond had invested in creating religious justifications, allowed him to maintain his self-image as a godly man while systematically torturing and murdering innocent women. The confession revealed that Drummond's escape attempt had been planned months in advance, with supplies and hideouts prepared throughout the mountain wilderness in anticipation of eventual discovery. His detailed knowledge of remote mining camps and abandoned settlements, documented in Sheriff Blackwood's investigation notes, showed that he had spent years preparing escape routes while continuing to imprison and murder his victims. More disturbing still, his hideout contained detailed maps of other mountain settlements with notes about available widows and isolated women, revealing that his escape plan included identifying new hunting grounds for future victims. Sheriff Blackwood's interrogation techniques, refined through military experience with Confederate prisoners during the war, gradually broke down Drummond's religious justifications to reveal the psychological mechanisms that had driven his killing spree. The stenographic record, preserved in complete form, documented how Drummond's facade of religious conviction crumbled under systematic questioning that forced him to confront the reality of his victims. Suffering without the filter of theological rationalization, his eventual psychological collapse, witnessed by multiple court officers and documented in their sworn statements, revealed a man whose carefully constructed identity as a godly preacher could not survive exposure to the truth of his actions. The interrogation's most damning revelation came when Drummond confessed to monitoring other settlements for potential victims, describing detailed surveillance of pregnant women in communities throughout the Tennessee mountains. His confession, corroborated by testimony from residents of neighboring settlements, revealed that he had posed as a traveling preacher to gain access to homes where he could identify isolated pregnant women who might become his next victims. This evidence, preserved in court records, established that his crimes were not crimes of passion or religious mania, but systematic, predatory behavior that spanned multiple communities over more than a decade. Drummond's detailed description of his underground prison. His construction revealed the premeditated engineering that had gone into creating the perfect facility for prolonged imprisonment and torture. His confession, documented in Sheriff Blackwood's investigation files, described how he had spent months modifying the natural cave system beneath his property, installing drainage, ventilation, and restraint systems designed to keep victims alive while ensuring their complete isolation from potential rescue. The technical expertise required for these modifications, combined with his systematic approach to victim selection, established beyond doubt that his crimes were the product of careful planning rather than spontaneous religious delusion. The interrogation revealed how Drummond had manipulated community trust to conceal his crimes, describing specific strategies for deflecting suspicion when neighbors inquired about his wife's extended absences during supposed difficult pregnancies. His confession detailed how he had used his medical knowledge gained through assisting with animal births and studying midwifery texts to simulate birthing complications that provided cover for his victims' murders. This evidence, combined with testimony from community members about his convincing performances as a grieving widower, demonstrated the sophisticated deception that had allowed him to kill multiple women without arousing suspicion. The psychological evaluation conducted during his imprisonment, documented in court records by the county physician, revealed personality disorders and delusions that explained his ability to compartmentalize his crimes while maintaining his community standing. The medical assessment, preserved in complete form in Tennessee State Archives, described a mind that had created elaborate justifications for systematic murder while maintaining genuine belief in his own righteousness. This professional analysis provided crucial evidence for understanding how Drummond had been able to function as a trusted community member while discreetly operating as a serial killer for over a decade. The confession's most shocking revelation came when Drummond described his preparations for future victims, including detailed plans for expanding his underground prison system to accommodate multiple simultaneous imprisonments. His drawings and notes discovered in his hideout and submitted as evidence revealed architectural plans for additional chambers that would have allowed him to imprison and torture multiple pregnant women simultaneously, while maintaining his cover as a grieving widower seeking comfort in remarriage. These documents established that his crimes were escalating in both scope and sophistication. When temperance escape interrupted his killing spree, the interrogation concluded when Drummond's psychological defenses finally collapsed completely, leading to a detailed confession that provided investigators with precise locations of evidence, exact dates of murders, and specific methods used to dispose of his victims' remains. His final statement, recorded in official court transcripts, contained detailed apologies to his victims and acknowledgement of his crimes as murder rather than religious service, providing the legal confession necessary to ensure his conviction while satisfying the community's need to hear their trusted preacher finally admit the truth about his monstrous double life. The systematic nature of Drummond's confession, verified through comparison with physical evidence and witness testimony, created an irrefutable legal case that would ensure justice for his victims while providing the mountain community with complete understanding of how their most trusted member had concealed such horrific evil. Each detail of his statement corroborated evidence already discovered while revealing additional aspects of his crimes that demonstrated the full scope of his systematic predatory behavior and the calculated cruelty that had driven his decade-long killing spree. The trial of Ezekiel Drummond began on June 15, 1884, in the packed courthouse of Bledsoe County, where the most comprehensive criminal case in Tennessee mountain history would deliver justice that satisfied both legal requirements and the community, this desperate need for moral resolution. Judge Horatio McClure presided over proceedings that featured overwhelming physical evidence, damning witness testimony, and Drummond's own detailed confession, creating an irrefutable case that would ensure his conviction while providing complete vindication for his victims. The prosecution's opening statement, preserved in complete court transcripts, promised to prove systematic premeditated murder disguised as religious devotion. While the defense could offer no meaningful response to evidence that documented a decade of calculated evil, Temperance Drummond's testimony on the trial's second day provided the emotional centerpiece that transformed legal proceedings into a powerful demonstration of survival triumphing over systematic cruelty. Her detailed account, recorded by court stenographers and preserved in Tennessee State Archives, described 8 weeks of imprisonment with such precision and composure that even Drummond's defense attorney declined to cross-examine her, recognizing that any challenge would only reinforce the overwhelming evidence of his client's guilt. Her description of daily sermons delivered while she remained chained in darkness, combined with her identification of physical evidence that corroborated every detail of her testimony, created courtroom drama that moved hardened mountain men to tears while sealing Drummond's fate. The presentation of physical evidence occupied 3 full days of testimony, with Sheriff Blackwood methodically introducing photographs, sketches, and actual artifacts that documented the systematic engineering of human suffering discovered in Drummond's Cellar prison. Each piece of evidence, from the iron shackles bearing Drummond's distinctive metalwork style to the scratch mark spelling "desperate" pleas for help carved into stone walls, created an irrefutable record of premeditated torture that no defense could explain away. The jury's examination of the actual restraints and their visible reaction to the carved messages from previous victims created courtroom moments that demonstrated the community's collective horror at discovering such calculated evil had operated undetected in their midst. The medical testimony provided by the county physician regarding the exhumed remains of Martha Hendress, Ruth Coleman, and Sarah Milan established the systematic nature of Drummond's murders, while providing scientific evidence that transformed suspicion into legal certainty. His detailed autopsy reports, read aloud in court and preserved in complete form in case files, documented evidence of prolonged starvation, restraint injuries, and systematic abuse that contradicted every official death record, while proving that each woman had been murdered through identical methods over a period spanning more than a decade. The physician's professional expertise provided crucial testimony that established cause of death as homicide rather than birthing complications, creating the legal foundation necessary for murder convictions. Drummond's own confession, read verbatim to the jury by the court clerk, provided the final evidence necessary to ensure his conviction, while revealing the twisted psychological framework that had justified his systematic killing of pregnant women. His detailed admission of guilt, combined with his description of theological justifications that transformed Christian doctrine into a blueprint for torture and murder, demonstrated both his legal culpability and his psychological unfitness to remain in society. The confession's clinical precision, describing methods and motivations, with disturbing horrified jurors, while providing irrefutable proof that his crimes were the product of calculated, predatory behavior rather than temporary insanity or religious mania. The jury's deliberation lasted less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on 4 counts of first-degree murder, a swift decision that reflected both the overwhelming evidence and the community's unified demand for justice. Judge McClure's sentencing statement, preserved in court records, explicitly rejected any consideration of Drummond's religious claims while acknowledging the community's need for meaningful punishment that would prevent similar crimes and provide closure for the victims' families. The sentence of 15 years hard labor at Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, while falling short of execution, represented the maximum punishment available under Tennessee law, while ensuring that Drummond would never again threaten innocent women. The court's most controversial decision came when Judge McClure ruled that Temperance's imprisonment of Drummond in his own cellar constituted justifiable self-defense rather than criminal retaliation. A legal precedent that recognized a victim's right to exact proportional justice when the legal system had initially failed to protect her. The ruling, based on testimony that Temperance had purchased Drummond's property legally at auction and had held him for exactly the same duration as her own imprisonment, established that her actions served justice rather than vengeance. This decision, preserved in legal archives and later cited in domestic violence cases throughout the South, demonstrated progressive judicial thinking that empowered victims while maintaining legal order. Drummond's death from consumption in Brushy Mountain Prison on March 12, 1889, provided the final resolution that satisfied the community's need for divine justice, while ensuring he could never harm another innocent woman. Prison records documented his rapid physical decline and psychological deterioration during his 5 years of incarceration, with guards reporting that he maintained his religious delusions until his final breath, never acknowledging his crimes as anything other than divine service. His death, viewed by Cove Creek residents as righteous punishment delivered through natural causes, provided closure that allowed the community to heal while ensuring that his victims were remembered as innocents rather than forgotten casualties of religious fanaticism. Temperance, a successful remarriage to neighboring farmer William Crawford in 1885, marked the complete triumph of survival over systematic evil, while her healthy delivery of 3 children demonstrated that Drummond's attempts to destroy her future had failed completely. She lived until 1934, becoming a respected community matriarch whose story served as both cautionary tale and inspiration for generations of mountain women who faced domestic threats. Her preservation of the underground cellar as a memorial site, combined with her frequent sharing of her experience at women's church gatherings, ensured that Drummond's crimes would never be forgotten, while empowering other women to recognize and resist similar predatory behavior. The complete court records, physical evidence, and witness testimony she helped preserve remain in Tennessee State Archives, providing permanent documentation that evil was exposed. Justice was served. Innocent victims were vindicated through the courage of one woman who refused to let systematic murder remain hidden in the shadows of religious respectability.